Between July 1979 and May 1981, more than 20 bodies killed in a wide variety of ways were discovered in Atlanta, Georgia, and the police were very soon confirmed in their fears that a serial killer of children was at work in the area. All the victims were African American, and the case was named the Atlanta Child Murders. Yet, the killer was finally convicted on only 2 counts of the murder of young adults. On July 21, 1979, 14-year-old Edward Smith was reported missing. Alfred Evans V, aged 13, was last seen alive on July 25th. 3 days later, a woman discovered their bodies half concealed in roadside undergrowth. Edward had been shot with a .22 weapon, while Alfred had been strangled. On September 4th, Milton Harvey, 14, vanished, his corpse being discovered 3 weeks later. The cause of death was given as unknown. 9-year-old Yusuf Bell was last seen alive on October 21st, and his strangled body was found in an abandoned school building on November 8th. The list of victims rapidly began to swell. Reported missing on March 5, 1980, 12-year-old Angel Lanier was found dead 5 days later, tied to a tree with her hands behind her back. She had been strangled. The following day, March 11th, Jeffrey Mathis disappeared. His remains, reduced to a skeleton, were not recovered until 11 months later, and it was impossible to determine the cause of death. Eric Middlebrook, 14, who left home on May 18th after receiving a telephone call, was found the following day, bludgeoned to death. By the end of July, the total of dead and missing children had reached 12. On June 9th, Christopher Richardson, 12, disappeared, and on the night of June 22nd, LaTonya Wilson, 7, was abducted from her home. The following day, 10-year-old Aaron Weich disappeared. His body was discovered with a broken neck on June 24th. On July the 7th, the body of Anthony Carter, 9, was found. He had died from multiple stab wounds. And on July 31st, Earl Terrell disappeared from a public swimming pool, his skeletal remains not being uncovered until January 9th, 1981. The mayor of Atlanta appealed directly to the White House for the FBI to be brought in. Although the Bureau seldom intervenes directly in murder investigations, there was justification in this case. At this stage, 4 children were still listed as missing and might well have been kidnapped, a federal offense. Many Atlanta citizens were convinced that the murders were racist, so that there was also the possibility of violation of federal civil rights. By the time 2 leading psychological profilers from Quantico, John Douglas and Roy Hazelwood, arrived in Atlanta, the number of cases had risen to 15. Clifford Jones, 12, was abducted and strangled on August 20th, and Darren Glass, 11, disappeared on September 14th. Young Charles Stevens was found strangled on October 10th, and the remains of LaTonya Wilson, abducted on June 22nd, were uncovered on October 18th. The 2 FBI agents soon discounted the possibility that the murders were racist. The crimes had all occurred in African American neighborhoods, and a white man prowling the area for prey would have been noticed. They also decided that the killings of the 2 young girls were likely unrelated, and drew up a profile of the murderer. He was African American, relatively rare for a serial killer, but almost certainly true in this case, single and aged 25, 29. He drove a police-type vehicle and owned either a German Shepherd or a Doberman dog. Lacking a girlfriend, he would be attracted to young boys, although there was no evidence that any of his victims had been sexually abused. Said Douglas, "He would have some kind of ruse or con with these kids. I was betting on something to do with music or performing." Meanwhile, the murders continued unabated. By the beginning of 1981, the death toll, including children missing, presumed dead, had risen to 26. Forensic investigators had found identical fibers on the clothing of many of the child victims, confirmation that this was the work of one serial killer. The fibers were examined at Georgia State Crime Laboratory and found to be of two types: a yellowish-green nylon that looked as if it came from a carpet, and a violet-hued acetate. News of this evidence appeared in a local newspaper in February 1981, and the killer at once changed his tactics. He turned his attention to young adults, several of them homosexual ex-convicts dumping their bodies in local rivers after stripping them of most of their clothing. On April 27th, the asphyxiated body of 21-year-old ex-convict Jimmy Payne was recovered from the Chattahoochee River 6 days after he had been reported missing. He was naked except for his shorts, but they carried a single matching fiber. For some weeks, the police staked out local waterways, and on May 22nd, an officer heard a loud splash in the Chattahoochee. Alerted, police and local FBI agents stopped a station wagon, and the driver identified himself as Wayne Williams, 23, music biz talent scout. He said he had just thrown some garbage in the river and was allowed to leave. The body of Nathaniel Cater, a 27-year-old ex-convict, was dragged from the river 2 days later, and a yellowish-green carpet fiber was found in his hair. On June 2nd, a warrant was obtained for a search of Williams's home, which was found to be carpeted throughout with yellowish-green nylon. Williams seemed an unlikely suspect. The only child of two respectable school teachers, he lived at home with his parents. The detailed examination of the fibers was turned over to the FBI laboratory. Wayne Williams was arrested on June 21st and charged with the murder of Nathaniel Cater. On July 17th, he was indicted for the killing of Cater and Payne. Given the statistical facts presented by the FBI of forensic evidence, the jury found Williams guilty on both counts on February 27, 1982, and he was sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment. There were no more child murders in Atlanta following Williams's conviction.